My dad secretly spent my entire college fund on his stepson's tuition, then cut me off and pretended I never existed, so I made a move that exposed everything he hid. A single action completely upended their flawless perception. Growing up, my father Mitchell and I were inseparable. He was my absolute hero, no exaggeration. My parents divorced when I was 8, but it wasn't one of those messy separations you often hear about. They both made it work for my well-being. I stayed with my mother during the week, but weekends were exclusively for my dad. Those weekends were the absolute highlight of my week. He'd pick me up after school on Friday, and I'd practically hurl myself into the car, already buzzing with anticipation for whatever he had planned. Dad wasn't the kind of distant father who'd just let me watch television while he pursued his own interests. He made every weekend feel extraordinary. We'd go hiking, or he'd teach me how to repair things around the house. Sometimes, we'd simply relax and watch documentaries because he knew I enjoyed learning random facts. He was constantly expressing how proud he was of me, always. If I excelled on a test or achieved something small, like winning a spelling bee, he'd look me directly in the eye and say, "You're my intelligent, strong girl." For a long time, those words meant everything to me. I believed nothing could ever come between us, but when I turned 13, circumstances began to shift. That's when Dad encountered a woman named Camille. Initially, I didn't mind her at all. She was vibrant and amiable, always inquiring about my school or my favorite books. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, Evan, who was 12, and Maddie, 10. They seemed pleasant enough, and for a while, I even considered it might be enjoyable to have siblings. Then, they moved in. That's when everything began to change. Camille resigned from her employment not long after, stating she wished to prioritize family life. I didn't give it much thought at the time, but it meant Dad had to undertake additional hours at work to support everyone. He started arriving home progressively later, and when he was present, all his attention gravitated towards Camille and her children. I tried to adjust, assuring myself it was merely a new family dynamic and things would eventually stabilize. However, with each passing day, I realized that stabilizing simply meant I was gradually becoming unnoticed. Dinners revolved entirely around Evan's baseball games or Maddie's ballet recital. I'd mention something I was enthusiastic about, like the science fair project I had dedicated immense effort to, and I'd receive a polite, "That's wonderful, dear," before the conversation reverted to them. It wasn't just the minor details, though. Camille's children always seemed to take precedence, no matter what. I recall one summer I genuinely wanted to visit my grandparents, Dad's parents. It was a tradition we upheld annually, and I eagerly anticipated it. But Camille suggested we go to a theme park instead because Maddie had never visited one. Guess whose plans were discarded? Mine. But events truly intensified during my junior year of high school. That evening, Mom sat me down and stated, "There's something you need to know about your college fund." She informed me that Dad had utilized it, every last bit. I was in complete disbelief, like, what do you mean he used it? Apparently, Dad had depleted the fund to cover Evan's private school tuition. Camille had persuaded him that Evan was struggling in public school and required a superior environment, so Dad took the money he'd been saving for my future and spent it on her son. Mom only discovered this because she had inquired about the fund while they were sorting through some old paperwork. She felt I had a right to know. I didn't even wait to process it. I called my dad that night and asked if it was true. At first, he attempted to downplay it. Evan genuinely needed the support, he claimed. "We'll work something out for your college," he said. I remember sitting there on the phone, utterly stunned. "Work something out?" I asked. "That was my college fund, Dad. How could you just spend it without even discussing it with me?" His reply, "You're smart, you'll be fine. Your mom can help, and I'll contribute where I can when the time comes," as if it were inconsequential. I hung up on him and wept for hours. Over the next few days, I tried to comprehend it. This was the same man who had always called me his number one girl, the same man who promised he'd always support me. Yet, when it came down to it, he chose Camille's son over me. It wasn't solely about the money, it was about the fact that he didn't even consider how this would impact me. When I finally spoke to him again, he doubled down. He insisted Evan was struggling and needed a better school, and that I'd understand someday. But I didn't understand, not then and not even now. All I could contemplate was how unjust it was. He'd pledged that money was for my education, and now it was gone. A few months later, as if depleting my college fund wasn't enough, I discovered Dad had purchased Evan a brand new SUV for his 18th birthday. My stomach plummeted when I heard. I questioned if he was the same man who had told me he couldn't afford to assist with my tuition, yet somehow he possessed the funds to lavish a luxury car on Camille's son. I could clearly see how much Evan was struggling after that. Our relationship transformed. I no longer viewed him the same way. Every time I visited his home, I felt like I didn't belong there. Camille would make subtle remarks about my infrequent visits, but when I did come, it was the same narrative. Dinner conversations revolved around Evan and Maddie, and any attempt I made to discuss my own life was brushed aside. It wasn't just the college fund, it was a pattern. Dad missing my school events because Maddie had a recital. Family vacations being planned around their schedules. Every decision he made seemed to prioritize them over me. By the time senior year arrived, I had ceased expecting much from him. I still saw him occasionally, but it felt more like an obligation than something I desired to do. The man who once made me feel like the most important person in the world had made it abundantly clear where I stood in his new family dynamic, and it wasn't at the center. So, my relationship with Dad felt more like a chore than anything else. Every visit, every conversation, it all felt forced, as if we were merely going through the motions. I had stopped expecting much from him after the entire college fund incident, but the way things unfolded that year showed me just how far down the hierarchy I had fallen in his life. I didn't completely sever ties, though. I continued visiting on weekends once in a while, primarily because Mom encouraged me. "He's still your father," she'd say, as if that made everything all right. But every time I entered that house, it felt like I was a guest in someone else's home. Camille and her children had completely taken over. One weekend, I arrived and instantly regretted it. The moment I stepped through the door, Camille began, "Oh, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence." She uttered it with a feigned smile, but her tone was anything but playful. I simply laughed it off, but inwardly I was fuming. I mean, seriously? I'm the one making an effort to visit, and that's the reception I get? Dinner that night was precisely what I anticipated. Camille spent half the meal discussing Maddie's upcoming dance recital and how stressful it was for her to manage everything. Evan interjected about his baseball tryouts, and of course, Dad was completely engrossed, nodding along and asking questions. I sat there, trying to find a moment to chime in and share something about my own life. When I finally mentioned that I'd been accepted to a few colleges, Camille barely allowed me to finish before redirecting the conversation back to Maddie's rehearsal schedule. Dad didn't even notice, or if he did, he didn't care. I sat there, gazing at my plate, wondering why I even bothered. It wasn't just the family dinners, though, it was everything. Camille possessed a way of making me feel like an outsider without ever being overtly impolite. Like when she'd plan family outings without even asking if I wished to participate. I'd learn about it after the fact, when Maddie or Evan would casually mention how much fun they had at the zoo or the movies or wherever. One time, I overheard them discussing a camping trip they were planning for the weekend. When I inquired about it with Dad, he merely shrugged and said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd be interested." Really? We used to go camping all the time, it was our activity. But now it was as if I didn't even exist. The worst part was how normal it all seemed to them. Camille acted as if I were some distant relative popping in for an occasional visit, not Dad's actual daughter. And Dad simply went along with it, as if this were the way things were supposed to be. I tried discussing it with him once, but he dismissed me. "You're overthinking it," he said. "You've got your own life now, you don't need to be here all the time." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I didn't need to be there. But that didn't diminish the pain. By the time spring arrived, I had started to emotionally withdraw. I still visited occasionally, but I maintained my emotional barriers. I'd sit through dinner, nodding and smiling at the appropriate moments, but I wasn't truly present. It was as if I had become a spectator in my own family, observing from the sidelines while they continued with their lives. One weekend, I decided to test the waters and see if Dad even noticed how detached I was. I barely uttered a word during dinner, just nodded along while they discussed Maddie's upcoming recital and Evan's baseball games. Dad didn't say anything to me the entire meal, not one question about school, my college plans, or anything else happening in my life. Camille, of course, filled the silence with her usual chatter about the difficulty of juggling everything with 2 children, as if I wasn't sitting right there, also his child. After dinner, I attempted to have a one-on-one conversation with Dad. I asked if we could go for a walk, like we used to, just the 2 of us. He agreed, but halfway through the walk, as I was about to express how I felt left out and how much he had changed, Camille called his phone. I couldn't discern what she was saying, but whatever it was urgent enough for him to cut our time short. "Sorry, dear," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "Camille needs me to help with something at home." And that was that. I rarely visited after that. At first, I felt guilty about it, as if I were abandoning Dad. But the truth was, it hurt less to stay away. I focused on school and my own plans instead. I secured a part-time job to start saving for college, since Dad's promise of figuring something out was clearly just empty words. Mom tried to assist as much as she could, but money was tight. Honestly, Mom was my biggest supporter. She wasn't just encouraging, she was my foundation. Every time I returned home feeling overlooked or disheartened after a weekend at Dad's, she was there, waiting with a sympathetic ear and my favorite cup of tea. I didn't discuss anything happening in my life with Dad. What was the point? He was too preoccupied playing super dad to Camille's children to notice anything I was experiencing. The final breaking point arrived a few weeks before my high school graduation. I had been hoping, praying that Dad would actually attend this one. It wasn't as if I had asked him for much over the past year. All I desired was for him to be there, to witness me cross that stage and hear my name called. But a week before the ceremony, Camille called me, not Dad, Camille. She said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know that your dad won't be able to make it to your graduation. Maddie's dance competition is that same day, and you know how important that is to her." I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, holding the phone, feeling a blend of anger and disbelief. She didn't apologize, she didn't even feign concern about how I felt. It was just, Maddie's event is more important, period. I didn't bother calling Dad to argue. What was the point? He'd made his decision, just as he always did. I wasn't expecting much from Dad anymore. After everything, missing my graduation, draining the college fund, and constantly prioritizing Camille's children, I had lowered my expectations to virtually nothing. But even so, around that time, his 50th birthday approached, and I still wanted to acknowledge it. It felt like one of those things you simply have to do, you know? No matter how distant we had become, he was still my father. A week before his birthday, I selected a gift for him. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a book about World War II history. I knew he'd appreciate it. He was always a history enthusiast, and we used to discuss such topics frequently when I was younger. It felt like a safe, thoughtful choice, something that might remind him of the connection we once shared. On the day of his birthday, I decided to swing by his house after work to deliver it. I didn't text or call ahead because, in my mind, this was just a casual visit. I assumed we'd chat for a bit, I'd give him the gift, and that would be that. But when I pulled into the driveway, I realized something was amiss. The house was illuminated like a Christmas tree, with cars parked all along the street. I could hear music and laughter emanating from the backyard. For a second, I thought perhaps I had misremembered the date, but no, it was definitely his birthday. I sat in my car, attempting to process what I was seeing. I wasn't invited. That realization struck me like a solid object. This wasn't just a small family gathering, it was a full-blown party, a party for his 50th birthday, and I wasn't even informed about it. Part of me wanted to turn around and drive away, just leave the gift on the porch and pretend I never came. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still believed there was a chance to mend things, decided to go in anyway. I knocked on the door, and Camille answered. Her smile froze when she saw me, as if she were trying to comprehend my presence. "Oh," she said after a moment, "we didn't know you were coming." I forced a smile and held up the gift. "I just wanted to drop this off for Dad. Is he around?" She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside to allow me in. "He's in the backyard," she said, gesturing toward the noise. I could feel her gaze on me as I walked through the house, and it took everything in me not to turn around and ask why I wasn't invited. The backyard was crowded. There were string lights everywhere, a catered buffet set up along one side, and even a DJ in the corner. It looked like something from a perfect magazine spread. Dad was near the grill, laughing with a group of relatives I hadn't seen in years. He looked up when he noticed me and waved me over. "Mollery, hey," he said, pulling me into a quick embrace. "I wasn't expecting you." I handed him the gift. "Happy birthday," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. He opened it right there and smiled when he saw the book. "Wow, this is great, thanks, kiddo." For a moment, I almost forgot why I was upset. He seemed genuinely pleased to see me, and it reminded me of the dad I used to know. But then the moment passed, and I was standing there, surrounded by people who all knew about this party, people who had been invited while I was clearly an afterthought. "Did Camille not tell you about the party?" Dad asked casually, as if this were a minor oversight. "No," I said, trying not to sound as wounded as I felt. "I just came by to drop off your gift. I didn't know there was a party." His face fell for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Well, I'm glad you're here now. Grab a plate and stick around." But the way he said it didn't feel welcoming, it felt obligatory, as if he were trying to smooth things over without actually addressing the problem. I stayed for about 20 minutes, just long enough to make polite small talk with a few relatives and force down a plate of food. Camille kept hovering nearby, observing me as if she feared I would cause a disturbance. I considered confronting Dad right then and there, asking him why I wasn't invited, but I didn't want to humiliate myself in front of everyone. When I departed, I kept replaying the entire scenario in my head, wondering if I had done something to merit being excluded. Was it because I didn't visit frequently enough? Because I didn't fit into their seemingly perfect family dynamic? Was Camille the issue? But regardless of the reason, I was already an outsider in my own father's life. For days afterward, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. I couldn't focus on school, couldn't concentrate at work. Every time I thought about the party, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness that I couldn't articulate. It wasn't just about the party, it was about everything: the college fund, missing my graduation, the constant favoritism. This party was just another reminder that I wasn't a priority in his life. I tried to push it aside, to tell myself it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered a great deal. I didn't call Dad after that, and he didn't call me either. Weeks went by, and the silence between us grew more profound. I thought perhaps he'd reach out to apologize, to explain why I wasn't invited, but he never did. It was as if the whole thing never occurred. At some point, I realized I was clinging to something that no longer existed. The dad I grew up adoring, the one who used to make me feel like I was his entire world, was gone. Or perhaps he was never truly there in the first place, and I was simply too young to perceive it. Either way, it broke something within me, and no matter how much I wanted to mend it, I couldn't do it alone. Then came Maddie's engagement. I learned about it the same way I learned about most things involving Dad's new family, through social media. There it was on my feed, a picture of Maddie beaming with an oversized diamond ring on her finger, surrounded by a group of people I didn't even recognize. Dad and Camille were front and center, of course, looking like proud parents. The caption read, "Can't wait to marry the love of my life, thanks to my amazing family for making this day so special." At first, I thought perhaps the engagement party was something small, arranged last minute. I tried not to jump to conclusions. But as more pictures began appearing, it became clear that this wasn't some casual gathering, it was a full-blown event. Decorations, catered food, even a photo booth. And guess who wasn't invited again? I didn't call Dad to ask why. What was the point? He'd either blame Camille, as he always did, or act as if it weren't a significant issue. So, I remained silent and told myself I didn't care. But it was difficult not to care when every other day someone new was posting pictures of the party: aunts, uncles, cousins. They were all there, smiling and laughing as if this were the happiest moment in the world. I thought perhaps Maddie's wedding itself would be different. Surely, I'd receive an invitation to that, right? After all, a wedding is a major event. Even if I wasn't close to Maddie, I was still family, or at least I was supposed to be. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing. No phone calls, no texts, no invitations in the mail. I tried to convince myself that perhaps they hadn't sent them out yet, but when I asked a cousin about it, she let it slip that the invites had already been mailed weeks ago. "I'm sure yours is on the way," she said, giving me a look as if she knew that wasn't true. A few days later, I received a text from one of my cousins. It read, "Hey, Maddie wanted me to let you know the wedding is on, date, at, location. Hope you can make it." That was it. No explanation for why I wasn't informed sooner, no acknowledgement that I was family, not even a direct invite from Maddie or Dad, just a perfunctory second-hand message, passed along as if I were a distant acquaintance. It didn't feel like an invitation, it felt like a formality they couldn't be bothered to manage properly. I stared at the text for a long time, trying to decipher how I felt about it. Hurt, certainly. Angry, definitely. But more than anything, I just felt exhausted. Exhausted from always being an afterthought, exhausted from trying to force myself into a family that didn't seem to care if I was part of it. For a brief moment, I considered going. Perhaps it would preserve the peace. Perhaps showing up would demonstrate I was the more mature person. But then I contemplated what it would truly be like, sitting in the back row, watching Maddie radiate happiness while Dad gave his toast, probably calling her the daughter he was so proud of, while I sat there wondering why he couldn't ever say those words about me anymore. I realized I couldn't do it, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because I needed to protect myself. Attending that wedding wasn't going to fix anything. It wasn't going to magically make me a part of their family. If anything, it would just be another reminder that I was on the outside looking in. I decided not to go. I didn't announce it to anyone or make a big deal about it. I just quietly made the choice and adhered to it. Of course, Dad wasn't going to let it pass. A couple of days later, he called me. As soon as I saw his name on the screen, I knew what the conversation would be about. "Molly," he began, and I could already discern the irritation in his voice. "I just heard from Camille that you're not planning to come to Maddie's wedding. Is that true?" "Yes," I said, maintaining a calm tone. "I decided it's better if I don't." "Better?" he repeated, as if the word made no sense. "How is that better? She's your stepsister. This is one of the biggest days of her life, and you're just not coming?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Dad, I don't feel like I'm truly wanted there. It's clear this invitation was sent out of obligation, not because anyone actually cares if I come. I think it's better for everyone if I stay home." He scoffed, and I could envision him shaking his head on the other end of the line. "Not everything has to be about you, Molly. This isn't about whether you feel wanted or not, it's about Maddie. This is her big day, and you're making it about your feelings. Can't you set those aside for once?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain composed. "Dad, this isn't just about the wedding, it's about everything. The college fund, my graduation, your birthday party, the engagement party. Do you not see how many times I've been excluded, how many times I've been made to feel like I don't matter?" "Jesus, Molly," he snapped, "you're always so dramatic. Camille has worked so hard to keep this family together, and all you ever do is complain. Maybe if you tried being more supportive, things wouldn't feel so tense." "Supportive?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're telling me to be supportive when I've been left out over and over again? You spent my college fund on Evan, you missed my graduation for Maddie's recital, you didn't even invite me to your birthday party, and now you're telling me I'm the one who isn't supportive? That's not fair," he said quickly, but I could hear the guilt creeping into his voice. "Really? Because it feels exactly like that," I said. "It feels like you've chosen Camille and her kids over me every single time. And the worst part is, you don't even care how much it's hurt me." There was a lengthy pause, and for a moment, I thought he might actually apologize. But instead, he sighed and said, "Look, I don't have time for this. You're either coming to the wedding or you're not. Just know that if you don't, it's going to cause problems. Maddie will be upset, Camille will be upset, and I really don't want to deal with that." "Then don't," I said, my voice sharp. "Deal with your perfect little family and leave me out of it." I hung up before he could respond. The days leading up to the wedding were more difficult than I had anticipated. I tried to concentrate on school and work, but my mind kept returning to that conversation. I replayed his words repeatedly, trying to ascertain where I went wrong. Was I truly being selfish? Dramatic? Was it too much to desire to feel like I mattered? On the day of the wedding, I stayed home. I turned off my phone and attempted to distract myself with a book, but I couldn't focus. I kept envisioning Dad standing up to give a speech, talking about how proud he was of Maddie, and the thought made my stomach churn. A few days later, I discovered through a cousin that Camille had been speaking poorly of me at the reception. She told anyone who would listen that I was envious of Maddie and didn't care about family. It hurt, but honestly, it wasn't surprising. Camille had been portraying me as the antagonist for years. What did surprise me was that some people believed her. I received a couple of texts from extended family members expressing disappointment in me for missing the wedding, as if I had committed some unforgivable transgression. I didn't bother replying. I knew there was no point trying to explain myself to people who had already formed their opinions. At that point, I realized I couldn't win. No matter what I did, I'd always be the bad guy in their estimation. If I defended myself, I was dramatic. If I remained silent, I was unsupportive. And if I walked away, I was selfish. Something had to change. I couldn't keep going to extreme lengths for people who didn't even want me around. I tried to move forward after Maddie's wedding. I stopped waiting for calls or texts from Dad and started focusing on my own life instead. But then, a few months later, I found out through a cousin about another family event. This time, it was a backyard barbecue at Dad and Camille's house, a large one with extended family invited. Apparently, it was meant to be a celebration for Evan graduating from college, and as always, I wasn't invited. I'd love to say I was surprised, but at this point, it was just typical. Still, hearing about it secondhand stung, especially since Evan's graduation was apparently such a significant event that they were throwing a full-blown party, while my own graduation barely warranted a passing mention. I tried to dismiss it. What was the point of dwelling on it? But as the days passed, the anger began to surge. Why did they get to keep pretending I didn't exist? Why did Dad get to play the role of a proud, devoted parent while completely disregarding the damage he'd inflicted on our relationship? It's not like I did something to them that causes them to constantly exclude me. I wasn't going to let them get away with it this time. I had enough of being marginalized, and I wanted to confront them with everything. On the day of the barbecue, I got in my car, drove to their house, and walked straight up to the front door. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I just opened the door and stepped inside. The sound of laughter and music spilled out from the backyard, and for a moment, I stood there, absorbing it all. The house was crowded. It seemed like most of the family was there, relatives I hadn't seen in years, people who hadn't even texted me, but somehow appeared for this celebration. I could hear voices calling out congratulations, laughter echoing through the walls, and the faint clinking of glasses. Camille was the first to notice me. She was walking through the living room with a tray of drinks when she spotted me by the door. Her face froze in surprise before twisting into that fake, saccharine smile I knew all too well. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, setting the tray down on the table. "Did you finally remember where your father lives, or did your mother teach you another trick to get attention?" That hit me like a physical blow. She had always been passive-aggressive, but this was different. She wasn't even attempting to conceal her disdain. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice trembling. "Oh, don't play innocent," she snapped, her smile vanishing. "You've always been like this, selfish, dramatic, just like your mother. She's the one who taught you how to act like the world revolves around you." I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could utter a word, Dad walked in from the backyard. His eyes widened when he saw me standing there. "Mallory, what are you doing here?" "I came to see my family," I said, emphasizing the word as much as I could. Camille let out a short, bitter laugh. "Family? That's rich, coming from someone who skips her stepsister's wedding and can't be bothered to pick up the phone. Are you serious right now?" I shot back. "You didn't even invite me to this party. I found out from a cousin. How many more times are you going to exclude me before you admit that you just don't want me around?" The room fell silent for a second. I thought Dad might finally defend me, but instead, he turned to Camille. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "What's going on is that your daughter decided to barge in and make a scene," Camille said, crossing her arms. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Make a scene?" I repeated. I wouldn't have to make a scene if you treated me like I mattered instead of constantly prioritizing Evan and Maddie. Dad turned to me then, his face hardened. That's enough, Mallory. You don't get to come into my house and disrespect my wife like this. Your wife? I snapped, the anger boiling over. She's the one disrespecting me. She's been doing it for years, and you just stand there and let her. Don't blame me for your problems, Camille said, her voice dripping with venom. You've been nothing but a nuisance in this family's side. You're resentful because you can't tolerate that my kids are more successful than you. That did it. I wasn't going to let her distort the narrative. I laughed bitterly. You mean Evan, who had my college fund handed to him on a silver platter, or Maddie, who's had everything handed to her while I've been working tirelessly to get through school? Let's not pretend this is about success. This is about you trying to erase me from my own family. Dad stepped in then, raising his voice. Mallory, stop. You're humiliating yourself. No, Dad, I said, my voice cracking. I'm humiliating you. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You don't like it when I point out the truth. You don't like being reminded of how much you've let me down. His face darkened, and for the first time, I saw just how deep his allegiance to Camille ran. You don't know what you're talking about, he said coldly. Camille has done more for this family than you ever have. If you can't accept that, then maybe you should get out of here. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. A few family members glanced at each other awkwardly, shifting in their seats. My Aunt Denise, one of the few relatives who had always been kind to me, looked shocked, her mouth slightly agape as she leaned closer to whisper something to her husband. Mitchell, that's too far, another relative muttered, just loud enough for me to catch it. Meanwhile, Camille stood behind Dad with her arms crossed, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She didn't appear surprised by his words. If anything, she looked satisfied, as if this were precisely the response she had been anticipating. The word struck me like a harsh blow, but I refused to let him see how much they stung. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal papers I'd been holding onto for months. Fine, I said, my hand trembling as I shoved the papers into his chest. If I don't belong here, then you can deal with this. It's a formal claim for the college fund you stole from me. Maybe Evan's private school and his gleaming new SUV were worth it, but I'm not letting you get away with it anymore. The room went silent. Camille's mouth opened and closed like a fish, and Dad just stared at the papers, his face pale. You want to talk about family? I said, my voice rising. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't treat their own like strangers. You've been nothing but a puppet for Camille, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out the door. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices escalating as the chaos I'd caused settled in. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken control of the situation instead of allowing it to control me. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. I had spoken my mind, but it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like the conclusion of something I'd been clinging to for far too long. 2 weeks after the barbecue, Dad finally reached out. I let the call go to voicemail, but his message was exactly what I expected, full of anger and blame. Mallory, I can't believe you're doing this, he said, his voice dripping with frustration. You're really going to drag this family into legal drama over some money? Evan needed that school, and you've had plenty of opportunities to figure out your own way. I can't believe you'd stoop this low. I deleted the voicemail without replying. What was there to say? He didn't even attempt to comprehend my perspective or accept responsibility for his actions. In his eyes, I was the villain, and Camille was probably fueling the fire as usual. A week later, I received a letter from Dad's lawyer. He was contesting my claim, arguing that the college fund had always been family money and that he had the right to use it as he saw fit. It felt terrible, but I wasn't surprised. If there was one thing I had learned over the years, it was that Dad would do anything to avoid admitting he was wrong. My lawyer, thankfully, was prepared. We had documentation proving the fund was specifically established for my education, including old statements with my name listed as the beneficiary. It wasn't just about the money, it was about holding him accountable for years of unfulfilled promises. The legal process stretched on for months. During that time, Dad's calls became less frequent, and when he did reach out, it was never to apologize. Instead, he accused me of tearing the family apart and putting everyone in an awkward position. Camille, of course, wasn't subtle about her disdain. She took to social media, posting vague but clearly targeted comments about ungrateful individuals who believe they are entitled to everything. Meanwhile, extended family members started taking sides. Some reached out to express their support, telling me they'd witnessed how unfairly I'd been treated for years. Others sided with Dad, claiming I was being unreasonable and should simply let it go. One aunt even called me to say, "It's just money, Mallory. Is it really worth ruining your relationship with your father?" But it wasn't just money, it was my future, my trust, and my dignity, all things Dad had disregarded without a second thought. I was done pretending that wasn't the case. When the case finally proceeded to mediation, the documentation was irrefutable, and every excuse he attempted to offer was met with solid evidence to the contrary. At one point, he actually had the audacity to say, "I thought Mallory was intelligent enough to figure out college without the fund, she didn't need it as much as Evan did." The mediator immediately shut him down, pointing out that the fund wasn't his to decide how to use, it was established for me, and using it for anything else, especially without my consent, was a clear breach of trust. In the end, Dad agreed to settle. He didn't apologize or even look at me as the terms were finalized. The agreement required him to repay a significant portion of the fund over the next few years, but the money wasn't what mattered most to me. It was the fact that for once, he couldn't just conceal his actions and pretend I didn't exist. The repercussions were immediate. Dad stopped calling altogether, and Camille escalated her social media campaign, portraying me as the ungrateful daughter who had destroyed the family. Extended family members whispered about the situation at gatherings I didn't attend, and the few relatives who did reach out to me seemed hesitant, as if they didn't want to be caught in the middle. It was messy and draining, but it was also liberating in a strange way. For years, I had gone to great lengths to maintain a relationship with Dad, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, things would improve. But the legal battle made it clear that I wasn't the problem, he was. I'd like to say that was the end of it, but of course, Camille couldn't let it go. A few months later, she sent me a scathing email accusing me of disrespecting her family. She even had the audacity to suggest I reimburse the money Dad was ordered to return, since you're the one who made a big deal about it. I didn't respond. I deleted the email and blocked her address. As for Dad, I haven't heard from him since the mediation. Part of me wonders if he'll ever try to reach out, but I'm not holding my breath. If he does, it'll probably be another attempt to shift the blame onto me or demand that I repair the relationship. But I've made peace with the fact that I don't owe him anything, not my time, not my forgiveness, and definitely not my silence.